The car rumbled down the uneven dirt road, its tires kicking up clouds of dust that shimmered in the fading sunlight. Anna gripped the map in her lap, tracing her finger along the faint line that led to their destination. "It should be just a little further," she said, glancing at David, who was at the wheel. His brow furrowed as he peered ahead, the road narrowing between looming trees that seemed to close in around them. In the back seat, Marcus stretched out, his feet brushing against Riley's backpack. "This place better be worth it," he muttered. "I'm not spending my weekend in the middle of nowhere for some lame ghost story." Riley, ever the optimist, leaned forward. "Come on, Marcus. It's not just any ghost story. This village has been abandoned for decades, and that well, people say it's cursed. Imagine the footage we'll get for the documentary." Anna smirked. "You mean, imagine how many views it'll get on your YouTube channel." The banter helped ease the tension that had been building since they left the main highway hours ago. But as they finally crested a hill and the village came into view, a heavy silence settled over the group. The village was exactly as described in the articles Anna had read. Dilapidated buildings leaned precariously, their roofs caved in and windows gaping like hollow eyes. Overgrown weeds choked the cobblestone paths, and an eerie stillness hung in the air. It was as though the world had forgotten this place, and time had chosen to abandon it too. David parked the car near what once might have been a town square. A rusted fountain sat in the center, dry and crumbling, its stone figures weathered beyond recognition. The group stepped out, their footsteps muffled by the soft, moss-covered ground. "This is it," Anna said, her voice quieter than intended. She unfolded the map, pointing to a mark near the edge of the village. "The well should be just over there, past those trees." As they walked, the air grew colder, and the shadows stretched longer. Marcus was the first to spot it, a circular structure of ancient stones, half hidden beneath a tangle of ivy. The well seemed to exude its own presence, an almost imperceptible hum that set their nerves on edge. "Looks like just an old hole in the ground," Marcus said, stepping closer. He peered over the edge, his voice echoing slightly as he called out, "Hello? Anyone home?" Anna rolled her eyes. Very mature. But Marcus didn't respond. He stood there, staring down into the darkness. "What is it?" Riley asked, moving to his side. Marcus turned to them, his expression unreadable. "I thought I heard something. Like, whispering." David chuckled nervously. "Probably just the wind." But as they walked back toward the car, none of them noticed the faint rustling of leaves behind them, or the way the shadows seemed to linger just a moment too long. The group settled into the small house they'd rented at the edge of the village. It was a modest structure, built decades ago, but surprisingly well preserved compared to the ruins they had passed earlier. The walls were lined with faded floral wallpaper, and the wooden floorboards creaked under their weight. There was no television, no Wi-Fi, just a faint scent of mildew and the occasional groan of the wind pressing against the windows. Anna unpacked her gear in the living room, carefully organizing cameras and notebooks. Riley busied herself in the kitchen, attempting to figure out how to get the old gas stove working. David was in the corner, setting up his laptop, even though they all knew it wouldn't connect to anything. Marcus, however, was quiet. He slouched on the worn couch, staring at his phone with a blank expression. His usual snark and energy seemed drained, as if something had shifted in him since their visit to the well. "You good?" Anna asked, tossing him a bottle of water. Marcus blinked, startled, as though she had woken him from a dream. Yeah, I'm fine," he mumbled, though his tone was unconvincing. As night fell, the group gathered around the small dining table, poring over their notes and discussing the next day's filming schedule. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the cracks in the walls. The faint rattling of the windows added an uneasy rhythm to their conversation. "What's the plan for tomorrow?" Riley asked, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. We'll start with some shots of the village, Anna said. Then we'll head back to the well. I want to get a closer look, maybe drop a camera down there and see how deep it goes. David frowned. Are we sure that's a good idea? That place, it felt off. It's just an old well, Anna replied, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. As they debated, Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He was barely paying attention to the conversation, his eyes darting toward the window every few seconds. What's your deal? David asked, noticing his odd behavior. Marcus hesitated before answering. I keep hearing it, he said finally. Hearing what? Riley asked, leaning in. The whispers, he replied. It's like, it's calling my name. The room fell silent. No one laughed or teased him this time. You're just tired, Anna said after a moment, though her voice was unsteady. We've all had a long day. But as the night wore on, the strange occurrences began. It started with the faucets. Riley went to brush her teeth and screamed when a dark, murky liquid poured from the tap instead of water. David rushed in, but by the time he arrived, the water was clear again, leaving them both shaken. In the living room, Anna noticed the large mirror above the fireplace seemed wrong. She swore she saw movement in the reflection, shadows flitting across the room even though no one was there. When she turned to look, the room was empty. Marcus, meanwhile, sat on the couch, his hands gripping his knees. The whispers had grown louder, almost deafening, though no one else seemed to hear them. He glanced at the door, half expecting it to swing open. That night, none of them slept well. The house groaned and creaked as if it were alive, and every gust of wind felt like a breath against their necks. In the early hours of the morning, Marcus screamed. The others rushed to his room, finding him curled up in the corner, his face pale and drenched in sweat. It was here, he stammered. It was standing right there, by the window. Watching me. But when they looked, the window was empty, save for the faint outline of a handprint on the frosted glass. Morning arrived sluggishly, the pale sunlight filtering through heavy clouds that seemed reluctant to part. None of them had gotten much sleep, and it showed in the dark circles under their eyes and the way they avoided each other's gaze over breakfast. The air inside the house felt heavy, almost oppressive, as though the events of the night had lingered and settled into the very walls. Marcus sat at the table, his hands trembling slightly as he stirred a bowl of cereal he wasn't eating. The whispers had quieted, but they hadn't left. They were there in the back of his mind, soft and insidious, like a tune he couldn't shake. We need to figure out what's going on, Anna said, breaking the tense silence. She was determined to take charge, though the edge in her voice betrayed her nerves. If we're going to understand this, we need more information about the well. David nodded, though his skepticism was beginning to waver. There's got to be some kind of rational explanation. Maybe the water's contaminated, and it's messing with our heads. We should test it. Contaminated water doesn't leave handprints on windows, Riley said sharply. She was usually the peacemaker, but the fear and lack of sleep were taking their toll. Something's wrong here, and we can't keep pretending it's not. Anna pulled out the map and spread it across the table. The village must have records somewhere. Maybe a library or a church. If we can find anything about the history of this place, it might help us understand what we're dealing with. Reluctantly, they agreed to split up and search the village. The library was a small, decrepit building at the edge of the square. Its door hung slightly ajar, swaying on rusted hinges. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the shelves were lined with crumbling books and papers that looked as though they hadn't been touched in decades. Anna and Riley began sifting through the mess, carefully pulling out journals and ledgers. Many of them were unreadable, the ink faded or the pages eaten away by time. But amidst the decay, they found a leather-bound journal with surprisingly intact pages. The name on the cover read Elise Marchand, and the first entry was dated over a century ago. Anna began reading aloud, her voice steady despite the growing unease. The journal described life in the village before its abandonment, ordinary at first, but then increasingly strange. Elise wrote of neighbors disappearing without a trace, only to be found days later near the well, their faces contorted in terror. She described hearing whispers late at night, voices that seemed to drift from the well even when no one was near it. The well doesn't just take, Elise wrote in one entry. It gives. It gives back what you fear most. Riley shivered, glancing nervously toward the door. What does that even mean? Anna didn't answer, turning to the last few pages. Elise had written about an attempt to seal the well, to block it off and end its influence. But every effort had failed. Tools broke inexplicably, and those who tried to close it off were found dead, their bodies twisted as though they had fought against an unseen force. The final entry was hastily scrawled, "Do not listen. Do not look. The well will always take." Meanwhile, David and Marcus searched the abandoned church. The building was barely standing, its roof caved in and pews splintered. Marcus wandered aimlessly, his mind foggy, while David examined the altar. He found a set of old records, detailing births, deaths, and other village events. One name appeared repeatedly, the Watcher of the Well. "What's this?" David muttered, flipping through the brittle pages. The records described a figure that villagers had claimed to see near the well, an indistinct shape that appeared only in their periphery, watching but never moving. As he read, Marcus froze. His breath hitched, and he slowly turned toward the door. "Marcus? You okay?" David asked, glancing up. But Marcus didn't respond. He was staring outside, his face pale and his eyes wide with terror. There, standing in the distance near the well, was a figure in dark, tattered clothing. It didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. But Marcus could feel its gaze, cold and unrelenting, locked onto him. "Marcus, what are you looking at?" David asked, moving toward him. The moment David touched his shoulder, the figure vanished, leaving only the faint sound of whispering in its wake. The return to the house was quiet, tension simmering between them. Marcus hadn't spoken a word since the church, and David's attempt to question him had been met with a blank stare. Anna and Riley, clutching Elise Marchand's journal, were equally subdued. The weight of what they had uncovered seemed to press down on all of them. Inside the house, the oppressive atmosphere felt thicker than ever. The air was stale, almost suffocating, and every creak of the floorboard sounded louder than it should have. Riley lit a few candles, their flickering flames casting long, unsettling shadows on the walls. "We need to talk about what we found," Anna said, breaking the silence as she placed the journal on the table. Her voice was firm, though the slight tremor betrayed her unease. David recounted what they'd seen in the church, his voice growing quieter when he reached the part about the figure near the well. "I didn't see it," he admitted, glancing nervously at Marcus. "But he did. And whatever it was, it's messing with his head." Marcus sat in the corner, his hands gripping the arms of the chair as though to keep himself grounded. He refused to look at any of them, his gaze fixed on a point just beyond the room. "It's not just messing with him," Riley said, her voice sharp with fear. "This thing, whatever it is, it's watching all of us." "That's what Elisa's journal said, right? The well will always take. What does that even mean?" Anna flipped through the journal, stopping at the passage in question. "It gives back what you fear most," she read aloud. I think the well doesn't just kill people. It feeds on them. Their fears, their pain, it's all connected to that thing David saw. The Watcher. The Watcher of the Well," David corrected, his tone grim. "That's what the church records called it." As they debated what to do next, Marcus suddenly stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I can't stay here," he muttered, his voice hoarse. I have to go. I have to. Marcus, sit down, Anna said firmly, moving to block his path. You're not thinking clearly. Whatever's happening to you, we'll figure it out, but you can't just run off into the dark. Marcus looked at her, his eyes wild with desperation. It's calling me, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I can hear it, it wants me to come back. And I can't stop it. Before anyone could respond, the lights flickered. The group froze, their gazes darting toward the ceiling as the bulbs buzzed faintly, casting erratic shadows across the room. Then, just as abruptly, the power went out, plunging them into darkness. For a moment, there was only silence. Then came the whispers. Soft at first, like the rustle of leaves in a distant forest. But they grew louder, closer, until the sound seemed to fill the room. It wasn't one voice, it was many. A chorus of incomprehensible murmurs that seemed to slither into their ears, wrapping around their thoughts like tendrils. Do you hear that? Riley hissed, her voice trembling. Yes, Anna whispered, gripping the edge of the table. David grabbed a flashlight from his bag and clicked it on, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. It landed on Marcus, who was now standing completely still, his head tilted slightly to one side as though listening. Marcus? Anna said cautiously, stepping toward him. He didn't respond. Marcus! David shouted, shaking his shoulder. Finally, Marcus turned to face them. His expression was vacant, his eyes glazed over as though he were in a trance. But the most unsettling thing was his mouth, it was moving, silently forming words they couldn't hear. And then, in a voice that was not his own, he said, "It sees you." The flashlight flickered, the beam dimming as the whispers swelled into a deafening roar. The air seemed to vibrate, heavy with a presence that none of them could see but all of them could feel. "Turn it off!" Riley screamed, clamping her hands over her ears. David fumbled with the flashlight, but before he could turn it off, the bulb shattered, plunging them back into darkness. The whispers stopped. For a long moment, there was only the sound of their ragged breathing. Then, from somewhere outside the house, came a low, guttural laugh. The laugh echoed through the still night, a chilling sound that sent shivers down their spines. It wasn't just a laugh, it was layered, as if multiple voices had joined together to form a single, guttural tone. Anna moved to the window, her heart pounding in her chest. The frost on the glass distorted the view outside, but she could make out the faint silhouette of the well in the distance, illuminated by the weak moonlight. Nothing moved, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching her. Did anyone else hear that? Riley asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We all did, David replied, his tone flat but his face pale. Whatever's out there, it's toying with us. They turned to Marcus, who now sat on the floor, his knees pulled to his chest. He rocked back and forth slightly, muttering under his breath. The trance-like state from earlier seemed to have passed, but his eyes were wide, filled with terror. I can't go back, he whispered, his voice cracking. I can't go back to the well. Don't let it take me. No one's going anywhere near that thing, Anna said firmly, though she wasn't sure she believed her own words. She crouched in front of Marcus, trying to meet his gaze. We're going to figure this out. Together. But we need you to tell us what you saw, what you're hearing. Marcus shook his head violently, his hands clutching his ears. It's too loud, he said, tears streaming down his face. I can still hear them. They're in my head. They're in the walls. Everywhere. Riley knelt beside him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. We'll get through this, she said softly, though the fear in her voice betrayed her. We just need to keep our heads straight. David paced the room, frustration and fear bubbling to the surface. This is insane, he muttered. We're stuck in some backwater village with no cell service, and now we're being hunted by what? A ghost? A demon? This isn't real. It's real, Anna snapped, her patience wearing thin. You saw what happened to Marcus. You saw the journal. We can't just pretend this is something we can explain away. Then what do we do, huh? David shot back, his voice rising. Wait here until it decides to kill us too. Before Anna could respond, there was a loud knock at the door. All four of them froze, their eyes darting toward the source of the sound. The knock came again, slow and deliberate, each thud reverberating through the house. Who could that be? Riley whispered, her voice trembling. Anna moved cautiously toward the door, her footsteps barely making a sound on the wooden floor. She reached for the doorknob, her hand shaking. Anna, don't, David hissed, grabbing her arm. We can't just ignore it, she said, her voice barely audible. Taking a deep breath, she unlocked the door and pulled it open. No one was there. The porch was empty, the snow untouched. But just as Anna began to step back, she noticed something on the ground, a small, folded piece of paper. She picked it up, her fingers numb from the cold. What is it? Riley asked as Anna unfolded the paper. The handwriting was crude, as though it had been scrawled in a hurry. The message sent chills down her spine. Leave now, or it will take you all. Anna's heart raced as she showed the note to the others. Who could have left this? Maybe it's a warning, Riley said, her voice shaky. Maybe someone in the village knows what's happening. Or maybe it's another trick, David muttered. Whatever's out there doesn't want us to leave. It's just messing with us. Anna glanced back toward the well, its dark silhouette barely visible in the distance. She couldn't shake the feeling that the answers they needed lay there, but the thought of returning to that cursed place made her stomach churn. We need to decide what to do, she said, folding the note and slipping it into her pocket. Do we stay here and try to ride this out, or do we try to leave the village? The road's blocked, Riley reminded her. We'd never make it out on foot in the dark. Then we wait until morning, Anna said, though the thought of spending another night in the house filled her with dread. As they debated their next move, Marcus suddenly stood up, his movements jerky and unnatural. His head tilted to one side, and a slow, eerie smile spread across his face. What's wrong with him? Riley gasped, backing away. Marcus's voice, when he spoke, was not his own. It was deeper, colder, and filled with malice. You can't escape, he said, his eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. The well has already claimed you. The room fell silent as Marcus's chilling words hung in the air. His twisted smile, the glow in his eyes, this wasn't Marcus. It was something else, something dark and malevolent. Marcus? Anna's voice cracked as she cautiously stepped toward him. It's me. We're here to help you. Marcus tilted his head further, an unnatural movement that made Riley shudder. His grin widened. Help? You cannot help him. He is ours now. Riley grabbed Anna's arm, pulling her back. That's not him. We have to get out of here. Before anyone could react, Marcus lunged forward, his movements swift and unnatural. He shoved David with a force that sent him crashing into the table, splintering the wood. Riley screamed, and Anna stumbled backward, her heart pounding in terror. David groaned as he pushed himself up, clutching his side. What the hell was that? He muttered, his voice strained. Stay back. Anna shouted, grabbing a chair and holding it out like a makeshift shield. Marcus, or whatever had taken control of him, let out a low, guttural laugh. You cannot hide from us, he said, his voice echoing as though multiple entities were speaking at once. The well demands its due. Leave him alone. Riley cried, tears streaming down her face. Take me instead. No. Anna snapped, spinning around to face her. Don't say that. But Marcus froze, his head snapping toward Riley with an unnatural speed. His grin faded, replaced by a look of eerie satisfaction. Brave, he hissed, stepping closer to her. But it does not work that way. Before anyone could stop him, Marcus collapsed to the floor, his body convulsing violently. His screams filled the room, raw and unrelenting. Anna dropped to her knees, trying to hold him down, but his strength was overwhelming. Marcus, fight it, she cried. You're stronger than this. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, the glow faded. Anna, he whispered, his voice trembling. I'm sorry. Then, with one final, blood-curdling scream, his body went limp. The room descended into silence, the only sound the faint howling of the wind outside. Anna knelt over Marcus, her hands trembling as she checked for a pulse. He's gone, she whispered, her voice barely audible. No, Riley gasped, falling to her knees. No, he can't be. David stumbled over, his face pale and streaked with blood from a cut on his forehead. What just happened? He demanded, though his voice wavered with fear. Anna shook her head, tears streaming down her face. The well, it took him. Riley's sobs filled the room as Anna gently closed Marcus's lifeless eyes. She couldn't bring herself to move away, her mind racing with guilt and fear. David turned toward the window, his jaw tightening. This is on us, he muttered. We shouldn't have come here. We shouldn't have messed with something we didn't understand. It's not over, Anna said, her voice hollow. The well won't stop. Not until it gets what it wants. What does it want? Riley demanded, her voice breaking. Why is it doing this? Anna glanced at the folded note in her pocket, her mind replaying the ominous warning. Leave now, or it will take you all. It wants us to leave, she said slowly, her voice trembling. But it's not letting us go until it takes what it's owed. So what do we do? David asked, his tone sharp with desperation. Do we stay here and wait for it to come for us, or do we make a run for it? Anna hesitated, her thoughts spinning. She looked at Marcus's lifeless body, then at the others. Running seemed impossible, the snow was thick, and the roads were blocked. But staying felt like a death sentence. Before she could answer, a faint sound reached her ears, the soft creak of footsteps outside. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. Did you hear that? She whispered. David nodded, his eyes narrowing. He grabbed a broken chair leg from the floor, holding it like a weapon. Someone's out there. Riley clung to Anna, her body trembling. It's the well, she murmured. It's coming for us. Anna moved toward the window, her heart racing. She wiped the frost from the glass, squinting into the darkness. At first, she saw nothing but snow and shadows. But then, just beyond the edge of the porch, she spotted it, a figure standing motionless in the snow. It was tall and gaunt, its outline barely visible in the dim light. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and its arms hung limply at its sides. Is that, Riley began, her voice faltering. No, Anna said firmly, though her voice quivered. It's not Marcus. The figure took a slow, deliberate step forward, its movements jerky and unnatural. We need to move, David said, his voice low but urgent. Now. As the figure drew closer, Anna made a decision. Upstairs, she said, grabbing Riley's arm. We'll barricade ourselves in one of the rooms. What about Marcus? Riley asked, her eyes wide with panic. Anna hesitated, her heart breaking. We can't take him with us, she said softly. Reluctantly, the group moved toward the stairs, their footsteps quick and quiet. As they ascended, the sound of footsteps outside grew louder, accompanied by the faintest whisper of a voice. Come back. Anna didn't look back. She couldn't. The creaking of the wooden stairs seemed unbearably loud in the oppressive silence. Each step carried the weight of their fear as Anna, Riley, and David ascended to the second floor, their breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. The hallway stretched out before them, dimly lit by the flickering light of a single, sputtering bulb. Shadows danced along the peeling wallpaper, their shapes twisting into grotesque forms that made Riley clutch Anna's arm even tighter. "This way," Anna whispered, motioning toward the farthest room. David hesitated, glancing back down the staircase. "We're cornering ourselves," he muttered. "If that thing gets in, what choice do we have?" Anna shot back, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need time to figure out what's happening. Staying in the open isn't an option." David nodded reluctantly, following as Anna pushed open the door to what must have once been a bedroom. The room was cold, the air stale and heavy with the scent of mildew. A single bed frame stood against the wall, its mattress long gone, leaving behind only rusted springs. Anna and David immediately began moving furniture to block the door, a warped dresser, a rickety chair, anything that could serve as a barrier. Riley huddled in the corner, her knees drawn to her chest, her wide eyes fixed on the doorway as though expecting it to burst open at any moment. The whispers began softly, almost imperceptible at first. "Anna." Her head snapped up, her blood turning to ice. The voice was faint, like a distant echo, but unmistakable. It was Marcus. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. David froze, gripping the broken chair leg he'd brought as a weapon. "Hear what?" "Anna," the voice came again, louder this time, carrying with it a tone of pleading. "It's Marcus," Anna whispered, moving toward the window. "Anna, stop!" David hissed, grabbing her arm. "It's not him. Whatever this thing is, it's messing with us." "But what if it is him?" she argued, her voice breaking. "What if he's still out there, and we're just leaving him to?" A sudden, sharp bang on the door silenced them all. Riley let out a muffled scream, burying her face in her hands. The banging continued, each strike more forceful than the last. The flimsy dresser shook with each impact, the wood groaning under the strain. "Let me in," the voice called, its tone shifting from pleading to commanding. It was still Marcus's voice, but distorted, layered with something darker. David stepped in front of Anna, holding his makeshift weapon with white-knuckled hands. "It's not him," he said firmly, though his voice quavered. "Don't let it trick you." The banging stopped abruptly, leaving behind an eerie silence. For a moment, none of them moved, their breaths caught in their throats. Then came the whispers. They were all around them, filling the room like a sinister breeze. Voices layered upon voices, overlapping and indistinct, yet unbearably close. They spoke of fear, of pain, of despair, their tones dripping with malice. "Why did you leave us?" one voice hissed. "You can't escape," another murmured, the sound like fingernails scraping against glass. Riley clutched her head, rocking back and forth. "Make it stop," she whimpered. "Please, make it stop." Anna crouched beside her, wrapping an arm around her trembling shoulders. "Stay with me, Riley," she said, her own voice shaking. "We're going to get through this." David turned toward the window, his jaw tightening. "If it's out there, we need to see it coming." He wiped away the frost and peered into the darkness. The snow fell steadily, the wind howling through the skeletal trees. At first, he saw nothing. But then, just beyond the porch, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Marcus. He stood perfectly still, his body illuminated by the pale glow of the moon. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, and his mouth hung open in a silent scream. "Anna," David said, his voice strained. She joined him at the window, her heart sinking as she saw the figure. "It's him," she whispered. "It's not him," David snapped. It can't be. Look at his eyes. The figure outside raised a hand, pointing directly at the window. At them. And then, he smiled. Anna stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. That's not Marcus, she whispered, her voice trembling. Before David could respond, the figure began to move. Not walking, but gliding, its feet never touching the ground. It moved toward the house with an unnatural grace, its twisted smile never fading. The whispers grew louder, filling the room like a deafening chorus. The words were clearer now, more insistent. Join us, they chanted. Join us. Join us. The figure reached the porch, and the banging on the door resumed, more forceful than ever. David tightened his grip on the chair leg, his knuckles white. If it gets in here. Anna glanced at Riley, who was now sobbing uncontrollably. We have to hold it off, she said. Whatever it takes. David nodded, positioning himself in front of the barricade. Anna joined him, her hands trembling as she picked up a loose piece of wood from the floor. The banging grew louder, the whispers more frantic. And then, with a deafening crash, the door gave way. The door burst inward with a deafening crash, wood splintering and the makeshift barricade collapsing like a house of cards. The force of the impact knocked Anna and David backward, and Riley let out a shriek, scrambling further into the corner. The air seemed to shift, growing colder, heavier, as if the room itself was holding its breath. In the doorway stood the figure, backlit by the faint moonlight spilling through the shattered frame. It wasn't Marcus anymore, at least, not entirely. His features were distorted, stretched unnaturally, his hollow eyes glowing faintly like embers. Stay back. David shouted, brandishing his makeshift weapon. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it tilted its head, the twisted smile widening as if amused by the feeble display of resistance. Anna, the voice was a mockery of Marcus's, the tone sweet and venomous all at once. Why are you afraid? Don't you want to be with me? Anna's breath hitched, her mind racing. She clenched the piece of wood in her hands, forcing herself to focus. You're not him, she said, her voice shaking but resolute. You're not Marcus. The figure's smile faltered for the briefest moment, replaced by something darker, an expression of pure malice. It stepped forward, its movements smooth and unnatural, as though the very concept of walking was foreign to it. David lunged, swinging the chair leg with all his strength. The weapon connected with a sickening crunch, but the figure didn't even flinch. Instead, it grabbed the improvised weapon mid-swing, yanking it from David's grasp with inhuman strength. David, move. Anna screamed, rushing forward to pull him back. The figure turned its gaze to her, and the room seemed to tilt, the air growing colder still. Whispers filled her ears, clawing at her mind, threatening to pull her under. Anna, the voices hissed. You can't save him. You can't save any of them. But she didn't let go. Gripping David's arm, she dragged him back, the two of them retreating toward Riley, who was sobbing uncontrollably in the corner. What do we do? David panted, his eyes wild with fear. Anna's mind raced. They couldn't fight it, not like this. Whatever it wasn't bound by the same rules as them. But maybe they didn't have to fight. Maybe they just had to survive. The window, she said, her voice urgent. We need to get out of here. David hesitated, glancing at Riley. She's too scared to move. Anna crouched beside Riley, gripping her shoulders. Riley, listen to me, she said, her tone firm but gentle. We have to go. Right now. I need you to be brave, okay? Riley looked up at her, tears streaming down her face. I can't, she whimpered. It's going to get us. No, it won't, Anna said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. I won't let it. But you have to trust me. Can you do that? Riley nodded hesitantly, her small hands gripping Anna's tightly. Good, Anna said, forcing a smile. Now, let's go. David had already pried the window open, the icy wind rushing in and stinging their faces. He climbed out first, landing in the snow below with a soft thud. Riley, you next, Anna urged, helping the girl onto the sill. David caught her as she dropped down, holding her steady. The figure moved closer, its smile returning as it watched them flee. You can't run forever, it said, its voice echoing unnaturally. I'll find you. Anna didn't wait to hear more. She climbed onto the sill and leapt, landing awkwardly in the snow beside David. The cold bit into her skin, but she ignored it, grabbing Riley's hand and pulling her to her feet. Run, she said. They sprinted across the yard, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The figure didn't follow immediately, but Anna could feel its gaze, heavy and suffocating, as though it was savoring their fear. They reached the edge of the forest, the trees rising like a wall before them. Anna hesitated, glancing back toward the house. The figure stood in the doorway, motionless, its glowing eyes fixed on her. Anna, come on. David shouted, pulling her into the shadows of the trees. They plunged into the forest, the snow crunching beneath their feet. The whispers followed them, weaving through the branches, growing louder with every step. But they didn't stop. Anna tightened her grip on Riley's hand, her jaw set. She didn't know where they were going, or if they could escape. But she wasn't going to let it win. Not without a fight. The forest swallowed them whole, the towering trees casting long, skeletal shadows that danced under the pale moonlight. The deeper they ran, the more the world seemed to shift around them. The snow muffled their footsteps, but the whispers grew louder, twisting through the branches like a living thing. Don't stop, Anna urged, her voice barely more than a breathless whisper. She tightened her grip on Riley's hand, glancing over her shoulder to make sure David was still close. I'm here, David panted, stumbling over an exposed root. He caught himself against a tree, his breath clouding in the freezing air. But where are we going? We can't just keep running blind. Anna slowed, her chest heaving. He was right, they couldn't keep this up forever. But the alternative was unthinkable. She scanned their surroundings, the dense forest stretching endlessly in every direction. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere at once, a chorus of voices overlapping in a maddening cacophony. This way, she said, pulling Riley toward a narrow path that snaked deeper into the woods. David hesitated. What if we're heading straight into its trap? Anna met his gaze, her own fear reflected in his eyes. Do you have a better idea? He didn't. They pushed on, the trees closing in around them like a cage. The air grew colder, the snow deeper, and the darkness seemed almost alive, pressing against them from all sides. Anna's legs burned with effort, but she didn't dare stop. Riley stumbled, letting out a small cry as she fell into the snow. Anna knelt beside her, brushing the frost from her face. Riley, are you okay? I'm tired, Riley whimpered, tears streaking her cheeks. I can't go anymore. Yes, you can, Anna said firmly, her heart breaking at the sight of the girl's exhaustion. You're strong, Riley. Stronger than you know. We just need to keep going a little further, okay? Riley sniffled but nodded, allowing Anna to help her to her feet. David crouched beside them, his voice low. We can't stay out here much longer. She's freezing, and so are we. We need shelter. Anna glanced around, desperate for any sign of safety. Then she saw it, a faint light flickering through the trees. It was small and distant, but it was something. There, she said, pointing. David squinted. What is that? I don't know, Anna admitted. But it's better than freezing out here. They moved toward the light, their steps quickening with hope. As they drew closer, the outlines of a structure emerged from the darkness, a small, dilapidated cabin, its windows glowing with the faint warmth of candlelight. Anna hesitated at the edge of the clearing. The cabin looked abandoned, the wood weathered and warped, but the light suggested otherwise. "Do you think someone's inside?" David asked, his voice wary. "There's only one way to find out," Anna said. She approached the cabin cautiously, her heart pounding. The whispers were quieter here, but they hadn't disappeared entirely, lingering at the edges of her perception. She knocked on the door, the sound echoing in the stillness. No response. Anna tried the handle, and the door creaked open, revealing a single room illuminated by the flickering glow of a lantern. The air inside was slightly warmer, though it carried a musty, forgotten scent. "Hello?" she called, stepping inside. No one answered. David and Riley followed, closing the door behind them. The room was sparse, just a wooden table, a few chairs, and a bed pushed against the far wall. A cold fireplace sat in one corner, its grate filled with ashes. "At least it's warm," David said, setting Riley on one of the chairs. Anna moved to the lantern, inspecting it. It was old, the glass smudged, but the flame burned steady. "Someone was here recently," she said. David frowned. "Or something." Anna didn't want to think about that. She turned to the fireplace. "We need to start a fire. There's some wood by the hearth." David nodded, grabbing the logs and stacking them carefully. "Do you think this place is safe?" "No," Anna said honestly. "But it's safer than out there." As David worked on the fire, Anna sat beside Riley, wrapping her in a blanket she'd found folded on the bed. The girl was still shivering, her face pale, but she managed a small smile. "Thank you," Riley murmured. Anna hugged her tightly. "We're going to be okay," she said, more to herself than anyone else. The fire crackled to life, its warmth filling the room. For the first time in what felt like hours, they allowed themselves to breathe. But the respite was short-lived. A sound came from outside, a low, guttural growl that made the hair on Anna's neck stand on end. David froze, his eyes darting to the door. "Did you hear that?" Anna nodded, her blood turning to ice. The whispers returned, louder this time, swirling around the cabin like a storm. And then, from the shadows beyond the window, a face appeared, twisted and inhuman, its hollow eyes glowing with malevolent light. It had found them. The face lingered outside the window, its empty eyes burning like embers in the dark. The grotesque smile stretched wider, revealing jagged teeth that didn't belong to any creature of this world. Anna froze, her breath caught in her throat. "It's here," David whispered, his voice barely audible over the crackling fire. The cabin seemed to shrink around them, the walls pressing closer as the whispers grew louder, a haunting symphony of voices that clawed at their minds. Riley whimpered, clutching Anna's arm tightly. "What do we do?" Anna hissed, trying to keep her voice steady. David grabbed the poker from the fireplace, holding it like a weapon. "We fight, if we have to." The whispers swirled outside, growing more frantic, more aggressive. Shadows darted across the windows, too fast to be human. Something heavy scraped against the walls of the cabin, the sound deep and resonant, like nails dragging across wood. Riley began to cry, the fear overwhelming her. Anna pulled her close, whispering soothing words she didn't believe. A loud bang rattled the door, making them all jump. "Stay away!" David shouted, brandishing the poker. The response was another bang, harder this time, shaking the hinges. The whispers rose to a crescendo, mingling with guttural growls that seemed to come from every direction. Anna's mind raced. The creature outside wasn't going to stop, it was toying with them, feeding on their fear. They couldn't just sit and wait to be torn apart. "David," she said, her voice urgent. We can't stay here. We need to find a way out. He looked at her like she was crazy. Out there? With that thing? Anna glanced at Riley, who was trembling in her arms. We can't protect her here. If it breaks in, she didn't finish the sentence. David's grip on the poker tightened. Fine. But where do we go? Anna thought of the faint trail they'd followed to the cabin. It had to lead somewhere, maybe to another house or a road. Anything was better than this. There's a path, she said. We follow it. Stay together, and don't look back. Another bang shook the cabin, and a splintering sound filled the room. The door was starting to give way. Now. Anna urged. David nodded, and they sprang into action. He grabbed the lantern, extinguishing the firelight to avoid drawing more attention. Anna wrapped Riley in the blanket, lifting her into her arms. The moment they opened the back window, the cold air hit them like a slap, but it was the only escape. One by one, they climbed out, their breaths visible in the frosty air. The forest was darker than before, the moonlight barely penetrating the thick canopy. The whispers seemed to follow them, slithering between the trees, as if the creature knew they had fled. Anna led the way, holding Riley tightly. David followed close behind, his eyes darting nervously. The path was narrow and uneven, but it was a path, and that was enough. Do you see anything? Anna asked, her voice shaking. David glanced back. No, but I can feel it. It's close. The air grew heavier, each step feeling like wading through water. The forest itself seemed to resist their passage, branches snagging at their clothes and roots rising to trip them. Then came the sound. A low, guttural howl echoed through the trees, reverberating in their chests. It was unlike anything Anna had ever heard, an unholy mix of rage and hunger. It's coming! David shouted. Anna's legs burned, but she pushed forward, her only focus on Riley's safety. The path twisted and turned, each step taking them deeper into the unknown. And then, up ahead, she saw it, a faint light, flickering like a beacon in the darkness. Relief flooded her. There, she called out. David picked up the pace, glancing back to make sure they weren't being followed. But the moment his eyes met the shadows, he froze. It's right behind us, he said, his voice hollow. Anna didn't dare look. She gritted her teeth and ran faster, her lungs screaming for air. The light grew brighter, resolving into another cabin, or what was left of one. The structure was partially collapsed, but it offered a glimmer of hope. They burst into the clearing, the ground crunching beneath their feet. David yanked open the rickety door, ushering Anna and Riley inside before slamming it shut. The interior was worse than the first cabin, dark, damp, and filled with the stench of decay. But it was shelter, and for the moment, it was all they had. Anna set Riley down, her arms trembling from the effort. Are you okay? Riley nodded weakly, her face pale. David wedged a broken chair against the door, his breathing ragged. This won't hold it for long. Anna scanned the room, searching for anything they could use. Her eyes landed on a faded tapestry hanging on the wall, its fabric torn and stained. Beneath it, carved into the wood, were strange symbols, like runes she couldn't decipher. What is this? She murmured, running her fingers over the carvings. David joined her, frowning. Looks like some kind of protection spell. Maybe this place was a sanctuary. Anna glanced back at the door, her heart pounding. Let's hope it still works. Outside, the growl returned, louder than ever. The whispers surrounded the cabin, seeping through the walls. And then, a single, chilling voice broke through the noise, clear and deliberate. You can't hide forever. The voice echoed through the dilapidated cabin, sending chills down Anna's spine. It was too clear, too human, to be from the monstrous thing that had been chasing them. She exchanged a glance with David, whose face had turned ashen. Riley whimpered, her small hands clutching Anna's arm as if her grip alone could keep the horrors at bay. The symbols etched into the wall seemed to pulse faintly, almost as if they were alive. David ran his fingers across the runes, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We don't know what these mean," he muttered. "But whoever carved them knew something about that thing. Maybe it's the only reason we're still alive." Anna nodded, her mind racing. What if it's a way to fight it? To end this? David hesitated, then looked back at the door. "If we're wrong, it could just make things worse." "We don't have another option," Anna snapped, her voice rising. "That thing is out there, and it's not going to stop until it has all of us. If these symbols are some kind of protection or—" Her words were cut off by a sudden, thunderous bang on the door. The flimsy barricade shook, the chair legs splintering under the force. Riley screamed, burying her face in Anna's chest. "It's here!" David shouted, grabbing the poker he had brought from the first cabin. Anna's gaze darted back to the carvings. "There has to be something, some way to activate them." David shook his head. "You think these are magic? This isn't a movie, Anna." Another bang rattled the cabin, louder this time, and cracks began to form in the doorframe. "Then why hasn't it come in yet?" Anna shot back, pointing at the symbols. "Something's stopping it, and I'm betting it's these." David didn't argue further. Instead, he stepped back, raising the poker defensively as the door groaned under the relentless assault. Anna's eyes scanned the symbols again. The shapes were intricate, interwoven like a complex puzzle. Some of the carvings were deeper than others, and as her fingers traced them, she noticed faint trails of red blood. "This isn't just a carving," she whispered. "It's a ritual." David turned to her, his eyes wide. "What are you saying?" "It needs blood," Anna said, her voice trembling. "Someone used their own blood to power these symbols. That's how it works." David stared at her, his grip on the poker tightening. "You're not serious." The door shuddered again, the top hinge snapping off. A clawed hand reached through the gap, its talons glinting in the dim light. "We don't have time to argue." Anna grabbed a shard of broken wood from the floor and pricked her finger, letting a bead of blood well up. She pressed it against one of the symbols. The effect was immediate. The rune glowed faintly, a warm, golden light that pushed back the oppressive darkness in the room. "It's working," she gasped. David didn't hesitate. He slashed his palm with the edge of the poker, wincing as he smeared his blood across another symbol. More of the carvings lit up, their light growing brighter. The creature outside howled, a sound so raw and guttural that it seemed to shake the very foundation of the cabin. The hand retreated, clawing at the air as if trying to break through an invisible barrier. "Keep going," David urged. Anna moved quickly, smearing her blood across the remaining runes. The cabin filled with the glow of the symbols, their light now pulsing in a steady rhythm. The door exploded inward, shards of wood flying in all directions. The creature stood in the doorway, its form barely contained by the frame. Its twisted, elongated body was a grotesque mockery of human anatomy, with 2 long limbs and a gaping maw that dripped with black ichor. But it didn't step inside. The glowing symbols seemed to hold it at bay, their light forming an invisible wall. The creature screamed, its voice a mixture of rage and pain. It slammed its claws against the barrier, but the runes held firm. "What now?" David shouted, his voice barely audible over the deafening noise. Anna's mind raced. The symbols were holding the creature back, but it wouldn't last forever. She glanced at the center of the carvings, where an intricate spiral pattern seemed to draw all the light inward. "It's a seal," she realized. "We have to complete it." "How?" Anna hesitated, then pressed her bloody palm to the spiral. The light flared, blindingly bright, and the whispers that had haunted them since the well suddenly stopped. The creature howled one last time, a sound of pure despair, before it was pulled backward, its form dissolving into shadow as it was sucked into the spiral. The light faded, and the cabin fell silent. Anna collapsed to her knees, her body trembling. David dropped the poker, his hands shaking as he leaned against the wall. "Is it gone?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Anna looked at the now dull symbols, their glow extinguished. "I think so." But as she held Riley close, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The well, the whispers, the runes, they were all part of something much larger. And whatever it was, she knew it wasn't finished with them yet. The cabin was eerily quiet in the aftermath. The faint glow of dawn began to filter through the cracks in the boarded windows, casting long shadows across the room. Anna sat with her back against the wall, Riley curled up in her lap, fast asleep. David paced the room, his eyes darting toward the now empty doorway every few seconds. "It's too quiet," David muttered. "I don't trust it." Anna didn't respond immediately. Her hand still throbbed from where she had pressed it against the spiral, and her thoughts felt like a jumbled mess. The creature was gone, but the oppressive weight in the air hadn't lifted completely. "It's over," she said finally, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "Over?" David turned to her, his face pale and lined with exhaustion. "That thing might be gone, but the well is still out there. That's where it came from. What if something else comes through?" Anna looked down at Riley, stroking her hair absently. "We'll leave. Get as far away from this place as possible. We'll warn people, make sure no one else comes here." David laughed bitterly. "And who's going to believe us? Stay away from the creepy well in the middle of nowhere, or a monster will come for you." "Yeah, that'll work." Anna frowned but didn't argue. He was right. People wouldn't believe them. They'd dismiss it as a ghost story or a desperate attempt to go viral. A sudden creak broke the silence, and both Anna and David froze. "What was that?" David whispered, gripping the poker again. Anna strained to listen. The sound had come from the corner of the room, where a small, dust-covered chest sat tucked beneath a broken shelf. She hadn't noticed it before in the chaos. David approached the chest cautiously, his footsteps barely making a sound on the creaky floorboards. He knelt down and opened the lid. Inside was a collection of yellowed papers, bound together with a frayed piece of twine. "What is it?" Anna asked, standing and setting Riley gently on the floor. David pulled out the bundle and flipped through the pages. "It looks like a journal," he said, his voice tight. "From someone who lived here." Anna crouched beside him, peering over his shoulder. The handwriting was messy but legible, the ink faded in places. As David read aloud, the weight in the room seemed to grow heavier with every word. "The whispers started after the well appeared," he read. "We thought it was just the wind at first, but then people began hearing their names. Seeing things. The first to disappear was old Henry. Then Martha. Each time, the well would seem deeper." David paused, his hands shaking. "Keep going," Anna urged, her voice barely above a whisper. "We tried to fill it in, to bury it. But the next morning, the earth had been dug away, as if something inside refused to be buried. We sent for help, but the letters never reached anyone. It's as if the well doesn't want us to leave." A cold dread settled over Anna. The well. David turned the page, his face pale. "We discovered the runes by accident, carved into the rocks around the well. When we bled on them, the whispers stopped, for a time. But the price was steep. One of us had to stay behind, to keep the seal strong. Those who tried to leave, never made it far." Anna's breath hitched. "What do they mean, one of us had to stay?" David's voice cracked as he read the final line, the well is not just a portal. It is a prison. And every prison needs a warden. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. No, Anna said, shaking her head. That's not true. We sealed it. It's over. David looked at her, his eyes hollow. Then why does it still feel like it's watching us? Anna's gaze drifted to the doorway. The woods outside were bathed in the soft light of dawn, but the shadows seemed to shift unnaturally, as if something unseen still lurked among the trees. Someone has to stay, David said, his voice barely audible. No, Anna said firmly. We'll find another way. There has to be another way. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. The journal's words were clear, and the oppressive presence in the air confirmed it. The well wasn't just sealed, it was tethered to the people who had invoked the runes. David stood, his expression resolute. I'll do it. Anna's heart clenched. No. We're not sacrificing anyone. We'll figure this out together. There's nothing to figure out, Anna, David said, his tone heavy with resignation. If we all leave, it'll break free again. Someone has to stay to keep it locked. Tears welled in Anna's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. We can fight it. We can. Anna, David interrupted, placing a hand on her shoulder. This isn't just about us. If that thing gets loose again, it won't stop here. It'll keep spreading until there's no one left to stop it. Anna shook her head, her vision blurred by tears. She wanted to argue, to scream, but deep down, she knew he was right. David handed her the journal. Take this. Warn people. Maybe someday, someone will find a way to destroy it for good. But until then, he forced a weak smile. I'll be here. Anna hugged him tightly, her tears soaking into his shirt. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, Anna and Riley walked away from the cabin, leaving David behind. The whispers began again as they disappeared into the trees.